Well, officially I'm paid to travel the world and to drink champagne. Unofficially, it's about managing the relationship with our importers. It's about finding new importers in the countries where we're not. It's about training their teams. It's about meeting the journalists. It's about promoting. It's about talking to the sommeliers. It's about talking to all the champagne lovers out there. So it's taken me to quite a few places which I would never have set foot in had I not been doing this job. Well, Philipponnat is, you could probably consider it the oldest champagne house in the sense that we have evidence proving that the family were buying grapes, buying land, selling land as early as 1518. But there was no such thing as an incorporated company at the time. So, and in fact, it's not really what you were doing 500 years ago that is important. It's what's in the glass today, that is. So in that respect, the family have always been in the same village until 1900. 1905, they moved to another village 1 kilometer apart. And this being France, 106 years still makes them foreigners in that new village. And they've built up a vineyard of mostly southern-facing Pinot Noir, which translates into very ripe, fruity, structured, full-bodied champagnes. We like our champagnes at Philipponnat with a lot of taste, and we tend to age them much longer than the minimum legal requirements so as to increase this intensity, this complexity. But we also see champagne as a drink, and a drink should be refreshing. And if champagne is not refreshing, then something is seriously wrong, in our opinion at least. So that's why there is very little sugar added, and never less than 25% Chardonnay in the blend, because Chardonnay, on top of many other things, brings you a good and nice acidity. So we really are a house that sees champagne as a wine, as a great wine, and we cater to these customers who understand champagne as a great wine. That's very, very important for us. To give you an example and to link with your first question, when Charles Philipponnat, who is the 16th generation of Philipponnats running the show, running the house, when he hired me, he told me, "You've never done that job before, but you're a wine lover," and that's the first quality needed to work at Philipponnat. Clos des Goisses is a very special vineyard that belongs exclusively to Philipponnat. It's you have to imagine a hillside of chalk, billions of cubic meters of chalk, facing full south with a 45-degree incline. It's the warmest, the ripest vineyard in the whole of Champagne. It's planted of about 2/3 Pinot Noir, 1/3 Chardonnay, which is the blend you will find in the wine. It's, as I said, the ripest, the warmest. It's something that we do not chaptalize. It's a wine that you can keep. We keep it for 8 to 11 years in the cellar before release. It's only 10 to 15,000 bottles a year, and you can age it. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to have to replace Charles Philipponnat. Could not go to one of these tastings where we opened some 51, 55, 66, 76 Clos des Goisses. And believe me, they were alive and very much kicking. So Clos des Goisses is, some people see it as the jewel in the crown. To be very honest, we're proud to own it. Any serious winemaker would make a very good wine there. But it was bought by Charles's great-grand-uncle in 1935. So the first vintage was 1935. And in fact, it's so ripe that the exception is when we don't make it, contrary to champagne traditional practice. So there are for example, no Clos des Goisses 77, 81, 84, 87. Since 35, only 13 vintages were not made, which is the exact opposite of traditional champagne practice. It's actually a champagne I recommend that you should carafe for 5 minutes. It's something you should not be afraid to pair with red meat, for example. It is champagne as a great wine. The bubbles, when I joined Philipponnat, in fact, Charles said the bubbles were not important, and I thought, that's it. I've joined a champagne house where the boss says the bubbles are not important. Maybe I should resign. And in fact, it took me about a year or two to understand, but bubbles will never make a bad wine good. It so happens that wines in Champagne have bubbles, but you need a great white wine to start with. And Clos des Goisses has this peculiarity of being a white wine, which, when it's young, if you put it in a dark glass, you can be forgiven for thinking it's actually a red wine by putting your nose in the glass. I've seen some very experienced journalists, very experienced tasters mistake it for a red wine just on the nose. So it is an outlier. There's no use putting it in a blind tasting because it will stand out. You will immediately recognize its personality. And the really last thing I would like to say about Clos des Goisses is that it's not interesting about how good it is in great vintages, because in great vintages everybody makes great wine, normally. It's interesting about how good it is in so-called lesser vintages, because it's so ripe. You tend to get best of both worlds with Clos des Goisses.